Chapter 1. The Encounter. The harsh winds of Verton swirled around the outermost edge of the mining colony, carrying with them the scent of dust and metal. The colony, nestled on the edge of a barren world, was a place of constant labor and monotony. It was a world devoid of anything resembling beauty or comfort, with red sand that stretched endlessly beneath the twin moons that hung like cold sentinels in the sky. This was a world of survival, where the roar of mining equipment and the hum of industrial machinery formed the soundtrack of existence. There was no room for frivolity or dreams. Ryland Darvis was familiar with the rough, industrial nature of Verton. He was a mechanic by trade, and he had lived in the colony long enough to understand the cadence of life here. Each day, he worked tirelessly, repairing the aging machines that powered the colony's operations. It was a quiet existence, one that required little social interaction, and Ryland had never once minded that. He enjoyed the solitude of his work, the simple satisfaction that came from fixing broken things, bringing them back to life. It was a life that suited him perfectly, a life of routine, free of drama, free of complication. His small quarters were located at the very edge of the colony, where the last of the machines buzzed in an unending chorus of activity. The lights were dim here, and the air was thick with the smell of oil, grease, and mechanical parts. His quarters, though sparse, were exactly how he liked them. A small cot, a desk littered with tools, and the soft glow of a terminal that provided his only connection to the wider galaxy. Ryland had no need for more. His world was contained within these walls, and he had no complaints. That evening, as the twin moons hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the endless desert, Ryland found himself finishing his work for the day. He had just returned from another grueling repair session in the mining sector. The latest mining drill had malfunctioned, and the crew had been forced to shut down the entire operation until Ryland could fix it. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. The machines were old, their maintenance deferred for far too long, but it was the best the colony could afford. Sitting down at his desk, Ryland rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the terminal in front of him. The digital clock displayed the late hour. His shift had ended, and the sounds of the colony around him began to fade as workers returned to their homes for rest. His own routine was simple: finish work, eat a quick meal, and sleep. There was no excitement in his life, no spark of unpredictability, just the cold, mechanical rhythm of a life that never changed. That was until the knock came. At first, Ryland thought it was just the wind. The walls of his quarters were thin, and the howling winds often created sounds that mimicked knocks or footsteps. But then it came again, louder this time. A distinct, rapid knock that echoed from the metal door of his quarters. Ryland hesitated. He wasn't used to visitors. The colony was a place of isolation, and most of the people here were too busy with their work to pay attention to anyone else. He wasn't particularly social, and neither were most of the others. He had his work, and they had theirs. Still, something about this knock felt different. It was urgent, almost desperate. Getting up from his desk, Ryland crossed the small room and approached the door. The hum of machinery outside his quarters seemed to dim, and he could hear the distant sounds of footsteps approaching. Whoever was outside, they were walking with purpose. Ryland's hand rested on the cold metal of the doorframe as he peered through the small viewing port. His curiosity piqued. At first, he saw nothing but shadows, but as he focused, he made out the silhouette of a figure standing just beyond the threshold. A human, or at least what appeared to be one. The figure was tall and cloaked in ragged clothing, but there was something distinctly otherworldly about them. As they stepped closer to the door, Ryland could make out the faint outline of strange markings on their skin, shimmering like faint constellations in the dim light of the hallway. Their face was obscured by a hood, but the shape of their frame was unmistakably alien. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of alien visitors, of course, but they were rare, and most of them never came this far out. The mining colony on Verton was far from the main trade routes, and only those in desperate need of resources ever made their way here. Was this person lost? Or had they come to the wrong place? Tentatively, Ryland reached for the door release mechanism, his mind racing with possibilities. What could this person want? And why had they come to him, of all people? As the door slid open, a blast of cold wind rushed into the room, bringing with it the sharp scent of the desert. The figure before him staggered slightly, as if they had been walking for a long time and were exhausted. They lifted their head, revealing a face that was almost beautiful in its alien otherness. Pale blue skin shimmered faintly in the low light, and long, silver hair cascaded around their shoulders, framing delicate, sharp features that Rylan had never seen before. Her eyes were the color of the darkest, deepest space black and endless, yet shimmering with a strange, mysterious light. She appeared fragile, her body thin, though her posture was regal, almost ethereal. But the thing that struck Rylan the most was her eyes. They held something, a depth of pain, sorrow, and hunger that seemed to cut through the distance between them. She was not here by accident. She had come seeking something. I need help, she said, her voice soft and strained, barely a whisper. There was a tremor in her voice that spoke of both physical weakness and emotional exhaustion. Please, I have no place to go. Rylan stepped back, taken aback by her sudden appearance and the strange aura she carried. But despite the shock, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of sympathy for her. Her clothes were ragged, covered in dust and dirt, and her skin appeared pale, almost translucent in the low light. She was starving, he realized with a start. Her eyes were wide with desperation, and the faint tremble in her hands spoke of a need greater than mere hunger. He had never been one to turn away someone in need, and despite his own reservations, Rylan found himself opening the door wider, allowing her to step inside. Come in, he said, his voice softer than he had intended. You're safe here. I'll help you. The alien woman didn't hesitate. She stepped into the warmth of his quarters, collapsing to the ground, as if the very act of standing had been too much for her to bear. Her knees buckled, and Rylan rushed forward to catch her, barely managing to steady her as she fell into his arms. She was too light. As he lifted her, he realized just how thin she was. She was more than just hungry. She was on the brink of collapse. Rylan's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he guided her to his cot, gently laying her down before retrieving some water and food from his supply. The colony didn't have much, but there was always something left over after a long day. He wasn't sure how long she had been wandering, but he knew she needed nourishment quickly. The woman's eyes fluttered open as Rylan handed her the water, her hand trembling as she took it. She drank greedily, and Rylan felt a pang of guilt at how long it must have been since she had last had something to drink. Thank you, she whispered again, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know how to repay you. Rylan shook his head, his gaze softening. No need for repayment. Just rest. He didn't ask where she was from, or why she had appeared at his door. For now, there were more important things like getting her the food and care she needed. The questions would come later. As she ate, her movements slow and careful, Rylan couldn't help but study her. Her features were otherworldly, and yet there was something familiar about her, something that seemed to resonate deep within him. Her presence was strange, but not unwelcome. There was a depth to her, a sadness that spoke to something beyond mere survival. Eventually, she finished eating, her strength returning slowly but surely. She looked up at Rylan, her black eyes filled with a gratitude that was almost overwhelming. I am called Amara, she said, her voice still soft but stronger now. I don't know what brought me here, but I will be forever grateful to you for saving my life. Rylan smiled faintly, unsure of what to say. You're welcome, Amara. He had no idea what the future would hold, but he had already begun to realize that this encounter, this strange, unexpected meeting would change his life in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the colony's machinery vibrating through the walls. Rylan busied himself with small tasks, not wanting to make Amara feel like an intruder. He fetched more food, a ration pack that he had set aside for himself. There wasn't much, just a few preserved protein bars and water, but he handed them to her with a quiet smile. Amara accepted the food, but there was hesitation in her eyes, as though she were unsure of how to interact, unsure of where she was. The glow from the small light above them cast shadows on her features, and Rylan watched her carefully, sensing her vulnerability. He realized that the small, private quarters that had been a haven of peace for him suddenly felt a bit smaller. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two strangers, one with questions, and the other with answers that had not yet been shared. Amara started, but then paused, biting her lip as she looked up at him. Her voice was soft, still recovering from the dry rasp she had fought off since arriving. "I don't know why I ended up here," she said, her voice low, filled with confusion and a deep weariness that seemed to stretch back for years. "I've traveled far, for so long. My people, they're gone." Her words trailed off as she lowered her eyes, unable to finish the thought. Ryland set the ration pack down beside her and knelt, sitting on the ground next to her cot. He hadn't expected such rawness, but there was something in her expression that made him want to listen. She was clearly not from Verton, nor was she a mere wanderer. She was a survivor, a woman who had seen things that Ryland could not even fathom, and the depth of her sorrow was palpable. "I'm sorry," he murmured, unsure of how to comfort her. He wasn't much of a talker, much less a healer of hearts. "You're safe here now. I don't know what's happened to you, but I'll do what I can to help." Amara met his gaze then, her eyes filled with gratitude but also an unspoken weight. She seemed to wrestle with her thoughts before speaking again. "I wasn't supposed to be here, on this planet. But I felt something pull me here, Ryland." Her voice was filled with wonder, tinged with a sadness that hinted at her confusion. "I don't know what it is. I only know it's where I need to be." Ryland felt the chill of the room seep in, and though the air was warm, it felt like the walls were closing in around them. What was it that had drawn her here? Why Verton, of all places? Was it just coincidence, or something more? He looked at her again, really looking. The strange markings on her skin had begun to glow faintly, like delicate veins of light running just beneath the surface. She wasn't just any alien. She was unlike anything Ryland had ever seen. She had been traveling alone for a long time, and from the look in her eyes, the trauma she carried wasn't just physical, it was deep, spiritual, and rooted in her history. Amara looked down at her hands, the tremor still evident as she clasped them tightly in her lap. "I don't know why you helped me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But there's something about you, Ryland. I don't feel alone here. I don't feel lost." Ryland wasn't sure what to say to that, so he simply gave her the time she needed. Slowly, the tension between them eased. Amara ate in silence, the food nourishing her frail body, but there was still something deeply fragile in the air. "I wasn't expecting this," Ryland said finally, his voice steady. "But I can't just let you go now. You need rest. You're safe here, for as long as you need." She nodded, and her gaze softened. "Thank you. I'll never be able to repay you for this kindness. But I must tell you, what's coming, what I'm running from, it's bigger than either of us can imagine." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air, and Ryland felt a chill run through him. It was clear that Amara's arrival was not by accident, and whatever it was that she was running from, he knew it would eventually find her. The thought of an unknown enemy, something vast and unseen, sent a ripple of unease through him. Before he could respond, she lay back on the cot, her breathing steadying as her eyes fluttered closed. Exhaustion had clearly taken its toll on her, and she seemed to finally surrender to the rest she had so desperately needed. Ryland watched her sleep for a long while, wondering what he had just become a part of. What had she meant by what's coming? And what was this strange bond that seemed to exist between them already? The answer, Ryland knew, would come in time. But until then, there was nothing he could do but keep her safe, at least for the moment. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Past. Ryland didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. His mind raced with the questions Amara had left him with. What had she meant by what's coming? Who was she running from? And why had she ended up here, on this isolated planet, far from any known civilization? The hours passed slowly as Ryland sat in the dim light of his quarters, watching the distant stars twinkle through the viewport. The wind outside had picked up, the harsh whistling of the air reverberating through the metal walls. His gaze fell back on Amara, who slept soundly now, her breathing even and peaceful. She looked so fragile in her sleep, as though a strong gust of wind might blow her away. Yet beneath her delicate appearance, Ryland sensed something powerful, a hidden strength, a determination. He rose from his chair and crossed the room quietly, careful not to disturb her. He needed answers, and he couldn't just wait for them to come to him. Whatever Amara was running from, whatever danger loomed on the horizon, he had to know more. Sitting down at his terminal, Ryland began searching through the colony's records. There were few official documents on Verton. Most of the resources here were devoted to mining and survival, but Ryland had learned over the years how to dig deep, how to uncover the secrets hidden in the colony's archives. If there was anything that could help him understand what had brought Amara to this barren world, it was here. Hours passed, the soft hum of the terminal providing the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Ryland found records of an ancient alien species, the Ethrians. Their civilization had been decimated in a galactic conflict centuries ago, and little was known about their fate. But there were scattered reports from deep space explorers' tales of strange remnants found in the outer rim, of ruins on distant planets, of glowing alien artifacts. One of the reports described a mysterious woman with glowing skin, a woman whose people had vanished without a trace. Ryland's heart raced as he read through the information. Could it be possible that Amara was one of them? An Ethrian? It fit the markings on her skin, the glow in her eyes, the ethereal quality she possessed. But if she was truly one of them, what was she doing here? And why was she running? Before he could delve further into his thoughts, a soft voice broke through the silence. Ryland. He turned to find Amara standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the dim light from the hall. She looked stronger now, her face more awake, though there was still a quiet fragility about her. "You're awake," he said, his voice a little strained. "You should rest more." Amara smiled weakly, stepping into the room. "I couldn't sleep. Not after what you've uncovered." Ryland frowned, surprised. "What do you mean?" She walked over to him and glanced at the terminal screen. "You were looking for answers. You found them. You've uncovered the truth about my people, haven't you?" The chill in her voice was unmistakable. She knew. And now, it was time for her to tell him everything. Amara's gaze lingered on the terminal, her eyes scanning the data Ryland had uncovered. Her expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Ryland wondered if he had overstepped by digging into the history of her people. But the silence stretched on, and Amara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You found the Ethrians," she said, her words carrying a weight that felt heavier than the planet's atmosphere. "You found what was left of us." Ryland nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't know what I was looking for, but yes. There's mention of your people, of a civilization that once thrived, and then vanished. The galaxy still whispers of them in ancient texts. But the records don't say what happened to you, just that your people were lost." Amara's eyes dropped to the floor, her face shadowed by the memory of a past she had clearly tried to bury. She took a step back from the terminal, her posture tightening as if the weight of history was settling on her shoulders once more. "We weren't just lost," she murmured, her voice tinged with both sorrow and a quiet fury. "We were hunted, betrayed by those we thought were our allies. The Ethrians were a peaceful people, but we were too powerful in the eyes of those who wanted to control the galaxy. And so, they destroyed us. Piece by piece, world by world, until only fragments remained." Ryland's heart ached at the bitterness in her words. He could see now that the stories he had read in the records were only part of the truth. Amara's people had been victims, caught in a web of galactic politics far beyond their understanding. "I had to escape," Amara continued, her voice growing steadier. "The last of my people scattered into the void. I thought that if I kept running, I could outrun the darkness. But it's always there. It's always waiting. They've been chasing me for years, Ryland." Her words were like a cold wind sweeping through him, sending a chill to his bones. He had only invited a starving woman into his home, someone who had appeared out of nowhere, and now he was entangled in a story far greater than anything he had ever imagined. He had no way of understanding the depths of her pain, but he could feel the weight of her burden, one that she had carried alone for far too long. "Who's chasing you?" Ryland asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "What do they want?" Amara's eyes flashed with something dangerous: anger, fear, or perhaps both. "There are others, powerful ones, who believe that the Ethrians are the key to controlling the galaxy. They think that if they can capture me, they can harness what remains of my people's power." She shook her head, her long silver hair swaying with the motion. "But they don't understand. We were never just about power. We were about knowledge, unity. And when they took that away, they destroyed everything we were. Now, I'm the last of us, and they'll stop at nothing to see me fall." Ryland didn't know what to say. He wasn't a soldier or a warrior. He wasn't even a diplomat. He was a mechanic, just a man who fixed things and kept to himself. Yet, somehow, he had become involved in something far bigger than himself. "I won't let them take you," he said, his voice firm despite the doubts swirling in his mind. "You're safe here. They can't reach you on this planet." Amara looked at him, her dark eyes narrowing slightly. "I wish that were true, Rylan. But there's a storm coming. And it's not just a storm of soldiers or bounty hunters. It's something more, something they've been planning for a long time. They've already found traces of me. It's only a matter of time before they come." Rylan stood up slowly, his thoughts racing. He had invited this woman into his life out of kindness, not realizing the depth of what he was inviting in. Now, he realized that her presence on Verton wasn't just a coincidence. It was a convergence of fate, and it had thrust them both into a battle they weren't prepared for. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his mind already racing through his options. Amara's face hardened, the vulnerability she had shown slipping away as she took on the demeanor of someone who had survived far too much. "Not long. The signal I've been tracking, it's getting stronger. They're closer than I thought. I came here to hide, but I can't stay hidden forever." Rylan turned toward the terminal once more, his thoughts moving in fast, jagged pieces. There had to be something he could do. The colony was small, isolated. There wasn't much in the way of military defenses or advanced technology. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let Amara face this alone. Not when she had already been through so much. "We'll need to move," he said, determination settling in his chest. "I'll help you. We can't fight this battle alone, but we don't have to do it here. We'll get you somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find us." Amara's gaze softened for a moment, a fleeting expression of gratitude crossing her features. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Rylan. I knew when I came to you that I had to trust someone. I didn't think it would be this. I didn't think I'd find someone like you." He met her gaze firmly. "No one deserves to face this alone. Not even you." Chapter 3. The storm approaches. The decision had been made. They couldn't stay on Verton, not if the danger was as imminent as Amara had suggested. The resources here were scarce, and Rylan knew the colony was ill-prepared for any serious threat. But there were options farther out on the planet, beyond the reach of the colony's main operations, lay forgotten facilities and hidden outposts that might serve as a temporary refuge. Rylan wasted no time. He began preparing what he could, gathering supplies, checking his equipment, and making sure Amara had everything she needed. The tension in the air was palpable, and though he tried to focus on the practicalities of survival, a part of him couldn't shake the fear that had settled deep in his gut. The unknown enemy that had hunted Amara for so long was out there, somewhere, and they would stop at nothing to find her. Amara stood beside him, her demeanor changing as she shifted into a mode of quiet resolve. The fragility she had shown earlier was gone, replaced by the focused determination of someone who had lived through more battles than anyone should. The lines on her face were etched with experience, pain, survival, and the price of being the last of her kind. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice low as she adjusted the small bag of supplies at her side. "There's an old station up north," Rylan replied, his hands moving swiftly as he checked the engines on his small transport vehicle. "I know it's a long shot, but it's out of the way. If anyone can keep us hidden for a while, it's there." Amara nodded, her eyes scanning the barren landscape outside. "If they're tracking me through signals, we'll need to keep off the grid. No comms, no electronics that can be traced." Rylan finished his preparations and looked at her, feeling a surge of protectiveness. He hadn't known what he was getting into when he invited her in, but now, he understood. This was no longer just about survival, it was about fighting back against a force that threatened everything. "We'll make it," Rylan said, his voice unwavering. "We'll be ready." As the engines of the transport hummed to life, Rylan and Amara climbed aboard. The vehicle lifted off the ground, ascending into the air with a low rumble, leaving the colony behind. The twin moons above cast long shadows across the desolate plains as they sped toward the unknown. But one thing was certain now. They were not alone in this fight, and no matter what came, they would face it together. The transport vehicle hummed steadily beneath them, its engines cutting through the dry, red desert landscape as they sped toward the northern outpost. The rocky plains of Verton stretched endlessly, nothing but dust and craggy hills for as far as the eye could see. The wind howled outside, rattling the vehicle's metal frame as if nature itself were trying to reclaim the planet. Rylan's hands gripped the controls, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Amara sat quietly beside him, her gaze focused outward, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Her presence was calming, but there was a quiet tension in the air. Rylan could sense it. They were both aware that time was running out. Every passing minute felt like a ticking clock, and the sooner they reached their destination, the better. Rylan stole a glance at Amara. Her face was impassive, but he could see the quiet resolve in her features. She had lived through horrors he couldn't even begin to imagine, and yet here she was, trusting him, relying on him. It made him wonder what she had been through in her years of flight. How many worlds had she fled from? How many times had she been on the run, only to face yet another pursuit? Rylan knew that the calmness in her eyes was the calm of someone who had long since come to terms with their fate, someone who had learned to survive, no matter what. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the faint glow of distant lights marking the boundary of the outpost they were heading toward. The station was a relic from a time when the planet had been bustling with more life. An old research facility left abandoned after the galactic conflict. It had once been a hub for scientific exploration, but now it was little more than a forgotten outpost, long since overtaken by the planet's harsh environment. Rylan had been there once or twice in his early days in the colony, back when there was still some kind of research going on. He knew the place well enough to feel confident it could serve as a hiding spot, at least for a while. But that confidence was tempered by a growing sense of dread. Amara had warned him about the danger they were running from, but it wasn't until now that Rylan fully understood the gravity of her words. It wasn't just some small-time bounty hunters they were running from. It was something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Whoever was after her had the resources to track her across the galaxy. He shuddered at the thought. If they could find Amara once, they could find her again. They had to be smart. They had to stay ahead of them. There's no turning back now, Rylan, Amara said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Her voice was steady, but Rylan could hear the faint undertone of anxiety. It was the first time he had heard her show any sign of doubt. They'll track us soon, and when they do, we need to be ready. Rylan nodded, his jaw clenched. We'll be ready. I know this planet like the back of my hand. They won't catch us. But even as he spoke, the words didn't feel as confident as he wished. He knew they were both in over their heads. The vehicle hummed steadily along the rough terrain, and as they neared the outpost, Rylan slowed down. They couldn't afford to attract attention, not now. The station, though old, had security systems that were still operational, and they would need to bypass them if they were to hide within. The last thing they needed was to be discovered before they had a chance to settle in. As they approached the facility, Rylan brought the transport vehicle to a halt behind a cluster of large boulders. The outpost loomed ahead, a large, cylindrical structure, partially buried beneath the sands. It had the appearance of a giant metal scar on the face of the planet, the rusted steel giving off an ominous glow beneath the light of the twin moons. We'll go on foot from here, Rylan said, glancing at Amara. We can't risk making too much noise. Amara nodded, her eyes scanning the perimeter. The tension in her body was palpable. She knew the urgency of their situation. Rylan helped her out of the vehicle, and they moved swiftly toward the entrance, ducking behind rocks and using the natural cover of the landscape to remain hidden. Every step they took felt like a step deeper into the unknown. Neither of them spoke. Their movements were silent, calculated. When they reached the entrance to the facility, Rylan pulled out a small, portable access device from his bag, one of the few tools he had been able to salvage from the colony's old tech. The access code was long outdated, but Rylan was good at this sort of thing. He had worked with enough ancient systems to know how to bypass basic security protocols. As the door slid open with a low hiss, they both froze, listening for any signs of movement. The facility was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of machinery and the faint rustle of wind outside. They were in. The doors sealed shut behind them, and they found themselves in the dimly lit interior of the outpost. It was a labyrinth of corridors and storage rooms, with old research equipment scattered around, most of it non-functional, but some of it still operational. Rylan led Amara down the hallway toward the central control room, where they would find a terminal to hook into the old security systems. But as they rounded the corner, Rylan's heart stopped. At the far end of the corridor, he saw a flicker of movement, two figures standing in the shadows, watching them. Ryland's breath hitched as his hand instinctively reached for the small blaster at his side. "Amara," he whispered urgently, but when he turned to look at her, she was already ahead of him, moving quickly toward the figures with a fluid grace that caught him off guard. Ryland followed, his mind racing. These weren't just random survivors. They were here because they were after her. They had found them. "Get down," Amara shouted just as one of the figures lunged toward her, but she was faster. Her body seemed to glow for a brief moment, and then with a quick movement, she disarmed the man and pinned him to the floor. The second figure reached for a weapon, but Ryland was already there, his own blaster drawn, his hands steady. "I won't let you take her," Ryland said, his voice low but unwavering. The man froze, realizing the situation. Amara's eyes met Ryland's, and for a moment, there was something in her gaze, something grateful, but also something darker, a recognition that this was only the beginning. The two men, now helpless, lay on the floor as Ryland and Amara exchanged a brief look. "We need to move quickly," Amara said, her voice steady now, more controlled. "We're not alone here, and it's only a matter of time before more come." With swift, decisive movements, Ryland and Amara secured the two men in a storage room, locking the door behind them. They couldn't afford to leave any loose ends. There was no going back now. As they made their way deeper into the heart of the outpost, Ryland realized that this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back, fighting for a future that was slipping further away with each passing moment. And though he had no idea what the future held, one thing was clear: he wasn't about to let Amara face it alone. Chapter 4: The Final Stand. In the control room, they finally managed to access the main system. Ryland worked quickly, hacking into the facility's old network. They had no time to waste. The attackers outside were getting closer, and the facility's power systems were already beginning to flicker. "This is it," Amara said, her voice tense as she glanced at the door. "We've got one chance." Ryland's fingers flew over the terminal's old interface, bypassing security codes and activating the emergency escape protocol. He could feel Amara's eyes on him, her silent strength a comforting presence behind him. The system whirred to life, and the escape route was open. "We've got one shot to get out of here alive. Follow me." As the door slid open, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ryland could hear the voices of the enemy, more of them, closing in. But this time, they were ready. Together, they made their way through the dark corridors, heading toward the only exit that led to the surface. Ryland's heart pounded as the sound of pursuit grew louder. They had no choice but to face whatever came their way. As they reached the surface, they saw the figures approaching. But this time, Amara was ready. With a sudden surge of energy, she disarmed one attacker and incapacitated another. Ryland fired his blaster, taking down the remaining threat. The storm that had been chasing them for so long was finally here, but they weren't going down without a fight. With the last of the attackers taken care of, Ryland and Amara made their final escape. They climbed into the transport vehicle and took off, leaving the outpost behind, knowing that their fight wasn't over, but it was just beginning. As the transport vehicle soared into the sky, the twin moons of Verton watched over them, their cold light casting long shadows across the horizon. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together, and no force in the galaxy could take that away.